Well, hello and welcome to today's Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, product manager here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to present Dion McCormick, no relation, our lead solutions engineer. Today, Dion is going to be going over some of the new reporting features in Alpha Anywhere, and he will be here to answer your questions. So now would be a great time to type your questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's get started. Hang on a moment. Put you on here, Dion. I believe I put you on mute. Hello, Dion. Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me, sir?
I certainly can. Let me go ahead and make you the presenter.
Excellent.
We'll get going.
Would have been so easy for you to mess with me. Dion?
I don't hear you. I don't hear you.
I know. Well, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I can see your screen.
Excellent. 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 Okay. We are ready to go. Let me go ahead and get out of this. Cancel download. Okay, there we go. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule right here almost in the midsummer. Longest day of the year was yesterday from what I understand, so it's all downhill from here. But we really appreciate you taking the time, and what's really valuable for us is if you could put your questions into the GoToWebinar control panel that we can do it. In fact, some of the content today came from people who mailed in questions regarding so we could do or so we could be prepared. So remember, at all times, if you're interested, you can always email us at guides@alphasoftware.com. That's GUIDES at alphasoftware.com, and we take those very seriously. We review them and then get them ready to go and show them or present them. And in fact, we're doing a bit of a follow-up on last week based on some questions that came in through that. So our agenda today is, first I want to go through and remind you of a couple upcoming items. Second, I want to go through a quick demonstration of how to integrate some of the reporting things we talked about last week and the new stuff into a mobile form. And then last but not least, open it up for questions. So get those questions in now. Quick refresher, last week we were talking about the new release 4.2, which just came out, and it had two new features that were in it. The first, which is very exciting, which we spent time on, is called improved HTML reporting. It allows you to do free-form reports, which traditionally had to be rendered into PDF, now can be rendered into a format that can be done on the mobile device, which is really exciting. Again, I do a lot of reporting, and this is going to make life much, much simpler. And then also the second is we're going to have the ability to include video recording in disconnected applications, specifically for PhoneGap applications that you're using Alpha for. So these two new features are great, and in fact they're so exciting, so powerful, so new, so interesting that tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time we have Mr. Selwyn Ravens is going to be doing a demonstration of both of these features and capabilities. So again, that will be scheduled for tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Selwyn Ravens. So mark down your calendars, and that demonstration will be available tomorrow. Real quick, Richard or Dave, how do they sign? Is there a sign up, or do they just need email, or how do they get the details on that?
Okay, so I'm going to paste the registration link in a minute into the chat window, and you can get it there. But some people told me last week that their version of GoToWebinar doesn't have a chat window. So if that's the case for you, please send an email to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com and say, I'd like the registration link, please. And I will email it right off to you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. And so mark your calendars, join us tomorrow. You're going to see the new stuff in action. Really powerful, really capable, and very, very exciting. Also, real quick reminders, we have a new reference application, the Pump Jack application. And in fact, golly, these guys are so busy. I was just talking to Dave this morning. He is working on the next generation of this. So we keep bringing this content. So this is available for you, and this will allow you to use it as a reference app to understand how to put together these kind of applications. One thing that's very nice is it has extremely nice visual formatting and capabilities, and Dave has just done a wonderful job on that, and we're continuing to improve that and move that forward. So very, very exciting. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is a quick reminder, and we talk about this, but it's very important. Let me open up my web browser real quick. Bear with me. There we go. make sure to go to alphasoftware.com. Dun, dun, dun. Click on the Alpha DevCon link in the upper left-hand corner of each of the pages. And if you go in here, you're going to find information about our upcoming Developers Conference, which is only a few months away. And this is going to be a phenomenal event. You can register by clicking Register Now. Make sure I haven't, it's bounced at me. Okay. My GoToMeeting bounced at me, so I wondered what it was. But you can register now, and also very, very important is we have pre-conference training that's available. And so you can click right here on the training button right here, and it'll take you to the training page, and you can register right here, see a little introduction and register this. So what's really cool about this is that we're going to be doing mobile optimized forms. So really showing you how to start from scratch with a blank piece of paper or a blank UX and quickly build a mobile optimized form connected to a SQL database. And it's a very straightforward step-by-step. You're going to walk away with actionable understanding and actionable capabilities. We're also going to, we're not going to do PhoneGap in this because we wanted to make it focused on the core skill sets, but we will be talking about where you need PhoneGap, what, you know, when you need to do that, when you can just do it at web, etc. So we're going to come away with an incredible understanding of how to build using the new technologies, new capabilities, so you'll be able to rock and roll. But also along with that, which is very exciting, is that we're going to lay the groundwork for how to actually implement other things, like what would you need to do to PhoneGap and what are some of the logistics and things along those lines. So you can register that by just clicking on register for training. That is available and open now. But we'd love to have you, first and foremost, at our DevCon 2016, and also take the time to train. Again, one day with us, you're going to save yourself days, if not weeks, of just kind of getting up to speed, because this is going to be a very focused, accelerated training session, and you're going to walk away ready to rock and roll on these new technologies. So please join us there, and it's going to be a lot of fun, great event, lots of stuff going on there. Okay, so what I wanted to go through today is kind of follow up on our discussion from last week. Specifically, I laid the groundwork talking about free-form reports versus table layout reports, mainly because tomorrow you're going to find out how you can use freeform to do all these great things there. And so I showed a demonstration where we were able to show how you could create a report, both freeform and table layout, and to demonstrate it. But we got a question during the week, and that was, well, that's great, you can create these reports and they're going to run well on mobile, but how do I actually get them to run on mobile? So how does that technique work? And so what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about mobile reporting, is basically how to take a report that you have generated and quickly integrate that into your mobile device. There's really two main methodologies for doing that with pros and cons. So what I'm going to talk about is there's a way to embed a report directly into a mobile interface, and then there's also a method, Action JavaScript, that allows you to dynamically launch a report within a mobile interface. And I'm going to actually walk you through each of those at this point in time. The idea is once you've built your report, you've kind of got the report, it's working great, and maybe it has parameters that are used to like populate it and filter it. Now how do I then go to integrate it into the user interface? So I'm going to jump over into my development environment, go to the Web Projects Control panel here, do a process check, Dave. Just want to make sure I'm coming through loud and clear and A-OK.
All is good.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I've gone ahead and already created a little UX. I'm going to show you how to just build this UX in a very short period of time. I'll walk you through building this in the next few minutes. But let me go ahead and show you how it works. So I used one of our standard templates, which is our mobile device templates. And in this case, it's kind of a standard iPhone kind of app. You have these buttons down below, and then you have a home page. So you'll notice I have two buttons, one where it's embedded report. So when I click on embedded report, it takes me to a page or to a panel with the embedded report in it. And you notice that it highlights this little button right there. And then I can go back to home, and I can then click dynamic report, and you'll notice there's a slight lag, but you'll see essentially the same report being opened up in a different panel. So I've got my embedded report here, and then I have my dynamic report being built here. And there's pros and cons of how you need to do both. And so what I want to do was show you how I built this simple control with a basic report 2 buttons and then a embedded report on one panel and then a dynamically loaded report on the second one. So we'll walk you through how to do that. And then as I do that, I'll talk about the pros and cons for using the 2 different methods of either embedding a report or in the other case, creating a dynamic report there. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my Web Projects control panel. I'm going to click the New button up here in the left-hand corner. I'm given a selection of a number of different things, but in this case I want a web component, so I'm going to click there, click Next. Now I can, again, we have a whole range of different component types that are available, but in this case I'm using a UX form, which is the core of any mobile solution, so I'm going to click UX. And then I'm given a whole host of different templates that I can use. And there's 2 that I really like. One is the panel navigator with tab buttons, which I'm going to use today. Also, don't ignore the panel mobile framework with split view menu is another kind of design pattern I use. But for today, let's go. I'm going to click on panel navigator with tab buttons and click OK. It's going to now build my basic UX, and this is always a good starting point. When I start most apps, I use one of these to start out with, and then I can tweak it, and as you grow more experience, you can kind of start from scratch, but this accelerates the situation because I can just click on here. You'll notice then I now have a nice home page, nothing on it. I can click these buttons down here, and you'll see as I click the buttons, these different things show up on top. And it's all pre-built, ready to go. So now all I have to do is fill out the content for each of these pages, or panels, to be actually doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to call it Mobile Report Display, and I'm going to give this 2 right here. Okay, so I've saved this there. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to delete this here. I'm going to add in a couple buttons real quick by clicking on my first panel card, go to other buttons, click the 2 buttons, okay, and I'm going to call those buttons, the first button is going to be embedded because I'm going to show an embedded report, and then the second one is going to be dynamic, which means a dynamic report. And to make them look nice, I'm just going to take the width here and make it 100%. That'll make the button consume the whole width of the screen. And obviously you have lots of CSS and things like you can use from there. Okay, so the first step is on our panel card number 2. So if we go in our application, nothing's really changed except we have a couple of these nice little buttons that are on there. But if I click on button number 2, it takes me to this panel card number 2. And in this one, I want to have an embedded report. Now, what an embedded report is, as I do this, I'll delete the text that's there. I'm going to click on panel card here. Give it a moment here. Delete that. There we go. Save that. I'm going to click on panel card number 2, and I'm going to go over to my controls. And there's an area here called Other Controls. So you have your data controls, which are things like text boxes, drop-down box, radio buttons, etc. But then also we have other controls, which then have this unique one called the embedded object. So I can click on there. It's going to open up a window. And then I can either embed another object, let's say another UX form, but in this case I'm going to click Report. So now here's a list of all my different reports that are in here. And I know the one I want in this case is called, let's go to Report Layout, to Customer Table Layout Report. And I use a little nomenclature. It's customer data in a table layout report. So I click OK. And now what I've done is I've actually embedded that report. So that means when that report it's fixed, it's there, it's always going to be there. And so if you have a standard report that's always going to be there that you want to load when the thing loads up at the beginning, you can just put it in there. And in fact, if I go ahead and click Save here, go into Working Preview, and then I'm going to scroll down here. I made a mistake. When I embed the object, look at my report definition. That's the name of the report, but let me know the initial view. And in this case, I want to set it to HTML. And that's part of the magic sauce. If you do PDF, it's going to try and render a PDF and display it as a PDF, which can be awkward on a mobile device. In this case, I want to set it as HTML, and therefore, when it renders this report, it's going to render it in an HTML fashion. So let's go back in here. And again, I'm going to scroll down here, Go to there, and you'll notice, boom, my report's in there. So I'm done. If I have a need to put an embedded fixed report in there, that's all I need to do is basically put an embedded object in there. Now what I want to do is I want to be able to click on this button here and go there. So I'm going to go back to my design, going to go to my embedded button right here. I'm going to go down to the click event. That's how I add behaviors to that. So I'm going to click on that. It opens up my action JavaScript builder. I'm going to click add new action. I'm going to type panel because I want to navigate panels. Click OK. So I set the active panel to be panel card number 2. So this is going to write the JavaScript for me, and in fact I can sit there and see it's just writing this little piece of JavaScript to say, hey, set the panel card number 2 active, and when I do that it basically will show it on the screen. So now that I've done that, I now have my first report done from the standpoint of I can launch my application, click embedded here, and you'll notice, boom, my report is right there. And if I need to go back to the home screen, I click there and go back and forth. But you'll notice a couple things. First, when I actually launch this, watch when I launch it. You'll see there's a touch lag time when I launch this versus normally. Because what it's doing is it's making a callback and it's loading up that report. Because it's going to automatically load that report up. And you can set things like delay it till you actually see it, a few other changes there. But again, you can easily set this up, and again, it can be scrolled like any other report. But the other part about it is that it's fixed, meaning I don't really have much control over it in terms of how it presents to the user. So now I want to show you a different method where I can dynamically load this report using Action JavaScript. So how I'm going to do that is the following. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first go to panel card number 3, and I'm not going to embed a card or a report there. I'm just going to empty it out so it's completely blank. So now panel card number 3, if I go into working preview, you'll see that as it goes there, if I go to panel card number 3, it's blank. If I go to 2, it has that embedded report. So what I want to be able to do is actually dynamically load that report in this panel card. So I'm going to go back into design. I'm going to click on the button dynamic. That's that second button on the first page. I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to double click on here and open up the Action JavaScript. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to load that report up. So I'm going to click add new action, type in the word in the filter list, report, and you'll notice one in here called open a report label or letter layout. Okay. So now it opens up a Genie. So now I can go through something similar to when we embedded it. I can go to report name, select the report I'd like, and I know it's customer table layout report is what I want. Okay. And then I'm going to say, you know, I want it to be HTML, not PDF. So it's going to open it up as HTML. So in this case, what I've done is very similar to the embedded is when I do this Action JavaScript, I tell it what report and what format. Now there's one other thing I can do or need to do is tell it where I'm going to open up that report. So in this case it defaults to Windows. So that would be normally a pop-up window, and on a desktop web application with your web browser that may be fine. You want to pop it up and you actually have a whole bunch of choices. It could be in a div on a page, it could be dynamic panels, tabbed UI pane, but in our case what we want to do is we want to open it up in that panel number 3. So I'm going to select panel here, and then it's giving me a choice saying, okay, well, which panel do you want it to open up with? And I click panel card number 3 and click OK and save. Okay. So now what we will do is, if you watch what will happen now, I'm going to go into the solution. You'll notice I've got my buttons there. I'm going to go to button 3. You'll notice it's empty. Nothing up my sleeve. Then I go back here, I click on dynamic, and you'll notice something. It dynamically loaded that. And another thing that's kind of cool is that it automatically navigates to that panel. That's kind of a nice feature in there, so you don't have to actually tell it to navigate to it. But that opens up into this panel. And so the embedded, all we're doing there is taking you to this panel that the report's already in. But every time I click dynamic, you'll notice there's a little circle that shows up, because what it's doing is it's dynamically running that report and opening it up in button number 3. So the question is, well, why would you want to use dynamic versus embedded? And that really has to do with what is on your user interface. So let's go ahead and do something here. Let's go ahead and, I'm going to go ahead and this is a little beyond what I was planning, but let me go ahead and do this here. I'm going to put a text box in here, and I'm going to go customer ID, okay? So I've got a text box in there, and since I know customer ID is a good one is ALF key, I'll set that to be the default value of it. Okay, so now when I click working preview, I can now, in here, you'll notice that I have this customer ID right here. And when I click dynamic, nothing changes in terms of this, but you'll see we have a full report here. But it could be this information right here, instead of being fixed, is being loaded from a list control or a web service or something like that. So now we can have some fun. We can go into my button for dynamic. I'm going to go ahead and open up that behavior. I'm going to go open the layout, and you'll notice in here that we have a couple features. You know, we're telling it what report initial view, but we can actually set a second, what's called a SQL filter. So what's neat about this is because we're dynamically loading it, we can actually, before we load it, set up a filter condition. So let me go ahead and show you how I do that. So as you know, we already have that field on our data on our form. So I'm going to define an argument that points at that field. So I'm going to call it customer ID, it's character, okay, and I've created that, and then right here you'll notice now I have that. So I'm going to define my SQL to be customer ID is equal to that argument. Okay, so to explain what I did there, an argument is kind of like a placeholder, a variable that you can pass into it. And so the neat thing about it is that argument can be dynamic. If I wanted to, I could go in here and literally type in ALF key, and if I click there, when I click this button, it's going to run this report, but automatically always show me just ALF key. But that's kind of hard-coded, so not very useful. So what we do is we create an argument that's going to be dynamic. So I'm going to go ahead and put this, I'm going to change this back now, and I'm going to insert the argument customer ID. So now what it's going to do is it's when this runs, and when you click on that button, it's going to open up the report, and it's going to run this filter, but it's going to have a dynamic element for that customer ID. So now I'm going to go ahead, and now below here it's saying, well, okay, great. You have this argument, but where are you getting the value of that argument? And again, that could be fixed, or it could be from a control. So I'm going to double click on there, and I'm going to insert my field placeholder to be customer ID. So what's going to happen is when this report runs, the first thing the system's going to do is go in there and see what's in that text box I put on there. It's going to put that into the argument, and then it's going to pass that argument value into the SQL filter. So it's kind of a step-by-step, and I'm putting a lot of stuff in here, but I wanted to show you how you could create very powerful reporting with this. So now I can click OK, and now what's going to happen is instead of just opening that report, it's going to actually run a filter with what's on there if I have done everything correctly, which we'll notice in a moment. So let's give it a try. So you'll notice I have ALF key that's in here. When I click this button, it's going to take this information, put into the argument, and pass it to the filter, and if it's right, we should see the only person for ALF key. You'll notice there's only one record in here. Now the power of that is that this could have been populated from a list control, like I was looking at a person, so you can use any information that's available in there to filter your report. So now what you can do is have one report that, depending on the record the person's looking at in the mobile interface. So to give you an example of that, I think it's Bondi, or what's a Bondi? Let me see if that's right. No, that's not it. It's I wish I remembered it. There's another one. Yeah, no, I'd have to go in and look at what the, actually, you know what? Let me see here. Might have it in here. Yep, let me look it up real quick. I've got it in my database. Okay, customers. Let's look up another customer name. Anatr, A-N-A-T-R. So let's go ahead and go A-N-A-T-R, do a dynamic, and voila, there is Anatar's only person that's in that record. So I kind of went a little deep here, but I wanted to show you that there are two methods you can embed or to run reports. One is you can embed an object or a report in there. a little less flexible. You kind of stick it in there and then it's going to run. And you can, when you do this, set a SQL filter, but the problem is that it's going to be pretty fixed by, because it loads immediately when you run this. There's some other tricks and stuff I won't go in right now, but to refresh an embedded object, but that's kind of fixed. I tend to like the ability to do the dynamic reporting, where in that case, what I do is I have an empty panel card. When I click on dynamic, I run this saying what report I can be, and then I set, in this case, like a filter criteria to actually open up that report. So one of the benefits of that method is I could actually create a copy of this button, tie it to a whole different report, and have that whole different report up in panel card. So I don't have to embed every single report. I basically just have to tell it dynamically which report. So the benefit is you might have 40 or 50 different reports. So you could be, you could display any one of those reports in this panel card by merely setting up like a button or a list control that if you select it, it runs that report. So there's a lot of flexibility when you use the dynamic method. So I highly encourage you to focus on that for your mobile solutions to be able to do it. Embedded, again, works great, very simple. You do have the ability to set filters and things like that, but somewhat fixed. I like the dynamic because let's say next week your client or whoever says, you know what, I've got these 3 other reports I'd really like to be able to show. It's going to be much easier for you to go in and do a few tweaks than having to embed every report and the navigation and the other things associated with it. You'll find it's very simple to use. So if I go back here, when we're doing our mobile reporting, there are 2 major methods in terms of integrating reports into your environment. One is using embedded, where it's fixed, it's pasted, it's embedded directly in there, and the moment you run it, boom, it's good to go. The other is what's called a dynamic launch report, where basically you have Action JavaScript that launches or creates that report on the fly in that panel or wherever you happen to want to be. And they have their pros and cons. Feel free to use a mix of both of them, but I hope this gives you a little introduction. What you're going to find out tomorrow, which we've talked about a bit before, is you'll notice when I was doing this, I kept selecting a HTML, what's called a table layout report in HTML, because that's the most efficient way to show reports in a mobile interface. Well, the issue around that, which is critical, is that if you use what's called a free-form report, it forces you to use a PDF representation, which doesn't work very well. Well, what you're going to find out tomorrow is that with the new 4.2 release, you'll get to use the free-form report editor, which is very simple, very powerful, very intuitive, and be able to render in HTML so you get the best of both worlds. So I highly recommend you take the time, again, an hour out of your day. You're really going to see what's going to happen. It's going to set you up for success. And with this, you're able to either use the embedded report or dynamic report capability, whichever one works best for you. And therefore, you can create incredible applications for your people in the field. And one thing I really like about reports is that you have an enormous flexibility on their formatting. So granted, you'll look at this, I used a quick report, so it's somewhat boring in terms of its layout. It's kind of a traditional report, but there's nothing to be said that you couldn't create a very nice HTML style report with pictures, images, graphs, pie charts, nice it's all HTML, so you can use CSS to style it anyway. So actually reports can become a very straightforward, fast way for you to create nice looking user interfaces for your data and your applications. So it's a really cool capability, and the more you know about it, the more you'll use in all your applications. So that is mobile reporting, just a quick introduction to mobile reporting and integration of mobile reports. The big news will be tomorrow, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand over control back to Dave.
Great, thank you, Dan. So we have a couple of questions, but we don't have a lot of questions. So by all means, go ahead and start entering them in.
Demerits for everybody.
Demerits for everyone except for the 2 people who asked us questions. 3 people. Okay. So let's start with the first question, and that is not a reporting question. It has to do with IIS versus the regular Alpha Anywhere server. And the question is there a difference in the ability to scale with IIS versus the regular AA server? They have an app that's small now, but they're hoping to grow it to a couple hundred concurrent users.
And the answer is yes. IIS does have some inherent scale capabilities. With a couple hundred users, depending on definitely the standalone app server, on the right machine with the right resources can handle that kind of volume. But IIS has a few other kind of inherent benefits. One is that if you're going to a server farm environment, it allows you to do some really powerful ways to have your app running across multiple machines and be able to handle people and other pieces. So I would have to say IIS definitely does have the edge in terms of performance and scalability in regards to some certain features of IIS. But I want to throw one other thing in there. I want to put out option 3. Alpha likes to give you different options. So option 1 is standalone. Option 2 is IIS. Both incredibly valuable, powerful. You can deploy on both. They both can support your demands, no doubt. They just take a little different angle towards it. But number 3, which is now entering beta, which is very exciting, is the Alpha Cloud, which is going to be built on the AWS. So therefore, in that situation, it's going to kind of give you the best of both worlds. It's really built off our standalone app server, but it will dynamically scale as your requirements scale. So maybe something you want to look into.
Sorry to interrupt. Built off the
Sure.
standalone, built off the application server for IIS is the cloud version.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
But the beauty of that is you don't have to do all the setup and other pieces there.
Yep.
So definitely, you notice we used IIS to build that out, but and so that's because of the ease of scalability and some other functions in there. But the one thing that's cool about this is there's very little configuration that's required to get it up and running. It's going to be more of a plug and play, good to go. So something to look into in terms of if you're concerned. Also, we have other clients that they scale up and down their requirements during the year. So for instance, let's say for school registration, all of a sudden it gets really busy, so they need a lot more capacity. But then during the middle of the year or in Christmas time, nobody's actually even hitting the thing, so it scales down. What's neat about the Alpha Cloud is that it'll allow you to dynamically scale up and down without you having to go in and worry about setting up more servers, having them sitting there doing nothing. So there's some really huge advantages that the Alpha Cloud will give people, both for immediate scalability, so you don't have to worry about that, but also in terms of scaling as demand requires. Very cool. You might have spikes in demand. Instead of having to build out a whole infrastructure to handle the spikes, you can set it up and the system will spin up to handle those spikes, leveraging the AWS cloud.
Excellent. So Alpha Cloud is currently in beta. We've now sort of moved to another version of beta as of today. So if anyone is interested in participating in that, who hasn't, just go ahead and send an email to guides, GUIDES, at alphasoftware.com, and we can get you set up on that. I don't have a date yet for when it will be out of beta. Might be a few months or so is our plan, hopefully by the conference. And someone here asks if there's a migration path for standalone hosted apps, can they get up onto the Alpha Cloud? And the answer is yes, we will have a means of doing that. It'll probably just be creating a new publishing profile in Alpha Anywhere.
We're going to make it easy for you.
Great. And then the other question is, Alpha Cloud eventually going to replace the Alpha Anywhere server? We do foresee someday that we may go to just pure the IIS version of the Alpha Anywhere server rather than maintaining both of them, but for the foreseeable future we will have both of them and we'll continue to support both of them, and we will certainly continue to support apps that were written for the standalone server that need to get moved to the IIS server. So those are all very much on our minds here.
It's a brave new world, isn't it, Dave?
It is indeed. Someone here asked, can you swap out an Alpha Anywhere server license to an IIS license without an extra charge? I'm not sure if there is a small charge or not. I think it may depend on what was purchased as part of your subscription. You could send an email to that one. I would send it to sales@alphasoftware.com, or customer service, custserve at alphasoftware.com, and they could do it. I do know that we are doing some license swaps recently, so we can help you out with that.
Yeah, that IIS has really matured. I mean, I'll tell you, Terry, the primary developer, and the whole team have just been really hammering on it over the last year, and it continues to become more robust, more capable, easier to manage, update, and everything else. And it's really a very mature technology, and we're very
It
excited
is,
about
and
it.
there are lots of production apps now that are relying on it every day. So it's very
Yes.
dependable technology.
And I think, yeah, I agree. I think the adoption rate is increasing it because,
Yep.
again, IIS gives a lot of other benefits that are, especially for Microsoft shops, that they rely on that. So it's easier to integrate and do other things that they need to do.
Yep. A white paper about the benefits of IIS is on the horizon, maybe the next week or two, and it'll also be a blog article, and we will let you know about that when it's ready.
Oh, I didn't even know about that. I'm excited.
Oh, I know.
Last to know.
So here's the a couple people have asked about, where do you get the PumpJack Pro application? So rather than pasting in the link that may or may not work in this GoToWebinar interface, I'm going to tell you, but actually if you could follow along with me here, Dion, and open up a browser, that would be great.
Yes,
All right.
sir.
So it is github.com/alphaanywhere. Once you get here, click on the Repositories tab. Right now the Overview tab is lit up, but Repositories, and you will see all of our sample applications live here. So that's where it is, github.com/alphaanywhere. Definitely the first place to look when you're looking for sample applications. Another question.
Look for the big A.
Okay, this is a question about someone who's running into an error while they're running Alpha Anywhere, a fatal error. But let me explain to you what's going on, because I think I have an idea of what might be the answer.
Oh, okay.
So here it is. Let me read it from the beginning. It said, I went through a period where I was traveling a lot while working on a project, so I loaded Alpha on my Surface and completed a lot of work with the project. But when I moved it back to my PC, even though it's working on the Surface, I get this error, fatal error running, and then the name of his grid. It says property not found, template.precalc.template search. Any clue what might have happened? Dion, I'm going to let you go first because I bet you have.
Well, yeah, actually, I've seen that happen before, and what happens is especially when you're working with grids, one thing to realize, grids and UX are handled a little differently. UXs are kind of standalone files. There's no compiling that goes on. They're there. Grids, behind the scenes, Alpha does some kind of hidden compiling and other things like that. So I think I've seen that error before, and the way I've addressed that is instead of clicking on Working Preview, I actually click on Live Preview, and that forces, I think, a recompile of the grid component, and then when I go to Working Preview, everything works fine. It's just kind of a weird thing I ran into. But yeah, I've seen that where you've moved it from one device to another. Like I was working with another person on a project, they emailed me a grid that I had been working on before. I put it on my machine, especially if versions have changed over time. So one quick and dirty way is make sure you have the same version of the Alpha development environment on both machines, first-most. And the way you determine that is just go to Help, About Alpha Anywhere, and it will show you the build and other information there. Then secondly, give it a try. Just when you're in there on your grid, just click Live Preview. And I found that sometimes does like a recompile, recrunch, and you'll see it actually work there. And then when you go back to Working Preview, the Working Preview seems to be working. And it's something related to the grid and how the data is precompiled or managed, or how the system's done there. So that's my best bet off the top of how to possibly solve that problem.
That sounds great. I would also reiterate making sure that you have the same version between the two. So if your Surface had a newer version and you brought it back to an older version, I for sure have run into that error myself in that case. The other thing, and you also pointed out the Working Preview recompile, which is a good one to do as well. So those are the two that I'd try definitely to get going. Question here about HTML reports. Do HTML reports support drill down? And can you do drill down reporting?
Yeah, there's some tricks you can use. One of the cool things about an HTML report is that in here you have the ability to include any kind of static text or expressions or pieces there. So first and foremost, you could use a embedded report. That's not necessarily drill down, but that's there. You can put in what's called an embedded report, or a linked, actually it's called a linked report, where you can have like a sub-report showing in there. But the other thing you can do is that what I've seen done before is that you can actually put a link in there that calls action JavaScript. So you can literally set up an action JavaScript to do a specific function, and within here is just call that little JavaScript call function to then say load up another report and drill down into the previous report. So I don't know if there's really a native drill down capability in table layout reports at this point in time, unless I've missed that somewhere. But the benefit is that since it is just HTML, etc., it allows you to, in here you can put in static HTML, and in this static HTML you can put a link that actually causes an action JavaScript to maybe reload another report that has detailed views below it. So this is all just straight as HTML, so you can put those kind of tricks into it to kind of essentially add behaviors to your reports.
Excellent. If I want to just go back to the question of the person having an error, I also want to point out one more thing that I've certainly run into, and that is when you build your grid and you save it, it saves it under its name A5W WCP for web component. And when you publish that, it also creates a file called, say mygrid.a5w WCP. So it looks like you have the same files, but the published version of the file is a compiled version of the file. So if you grabbed it, say, from the server and then tried to open up in the development environment, it's not going to work. Or if you pulled it out of the working preview directory and tried to open it in a development environment, it's not going to work. So it's sort of confusing that the compiled and non-compiled ones have the exact same extension, but it's something that you just have to know. Just make sure you're pulling it from the right place. That would be my other piece of advice on that, because I've seen people get into trouble.
Yeah, and in fact, I had a situation where I lost a control, and I thought, oh, I'll just go to the server. I've got it up on my app server, so I'll pull it down a grid, and I'll relaunch it, and it didn't like that, because there's a compile step that goes on where it does a bunch of little stuff, and you don't see that with the UX control. I have no problem bringing a UX control. I didn't know that. And that's where lists, by the way, just to let you know, grids are awesome. I continue to use them. I use them a lot and will do so because they're so powerful. But more and more list controls are really where you go, because they're parts of UXs and you don't have a lot of some of these quirky things that go on. And more the list control is important for disconnected apps and stuff like that. So as a general principle, feel free to use grids, but start looking where you can use lists. And the more you use lists, the more you'll be positioned for the future. Plus, lists give you an enormous amount of formatting control to make it look beautiful within your interfaces. So kind of a side note, but lists are great, and you don't have some of these weird things that go on. But hopefully that will fix the issue that you ran into.
Excellent. Here is a troubleshooting question, and it's a question about an approach. How do you go about doing this type of troubleshooting? So let me explain what the problem is, and we'll get into it. So what's the best way to troubleshoot an issue after I upgraded the server to a new version? I think in this case they went to 4.2. And just one of their apps doesn't function properly. There's no error in particular, but when it runs, it just doesn't run. So if they roll back to a prior version of the server, it works fine. What would you do to begin troubleshooting that?
Well, first, just kind of as a word of the wise, when you're on your server, you can actually run multiple app servers at the one time. You can install it and structure it that way. So what you can do is actually, before kind of pulling the big switch, there is a way for you to set up kind of a demonstration environment where you set up the other app server, launch it so it's on the server, and then you publish to that. The first step is to, again, make sure that both your dev system and your application server are on the same release level, because I've noticed that I've done this myself. If I don't sync them up in terms of, I'll install the new app server, which has the new version, I'll install the new dev, and then I make sure I do a publish of all of my files, not just a couple files, but of my whole application to the new one, because there may be some dependencies on the new server, a different way things are handled. So I install the new server, either as on a test machine or as a second server running on that same server. I do the same install with the development environment, and then I do a publish of everything in my application. So that's step number one. That way I know I'm kind of on the right level as far as goes there. Then what I start to do is I look in and see if in terms of that one application that's not running, the question then becomes, what is, is it a particular control? Can you run it okay in working preview? Can you run it okay in live preview on your local machine using it, using the local, built-in development server? So I kind of get rid of the app server for a little while and go make sure that my app runs completely nicely on my development environment. And once I've kind of gone through those two, usually something will crop up and I'll see, oh, I either didn't recompile my app and publish it, or I missed something differently, or I noticed there's a JavaScript issue that, oh, it's not like I didn't set a security setting or something along those lines. But first step is make sure your environments are synced and you're working on the same environments from development to production. Also make sure that you can run your app completely cleanly on your local machine using the app server. Meaning specifically, I can go to my local here, do a publish to my local web root of everything, run it locally here. I have a lot more control over that than on my server. Then once I know everything's running locally, then I go through and publish all files. And by the way, to do that, to make sure you get a clean publish, this is what you do. You select your profile, you click here, all files, and then, very important right here, unclick publish new or modified files only, because if you leave this on, it's only going to publish the last things you modified. If you unselect that, it will automatically publish everything. And if you want to be really crazy, you can click clear publishing history, and it kind of completely resets your publishing, meaning that the system says, oh, I've never published this before, I'm ready to go. So you don't necessarily need to do that, but sometimes I'll do it. But the important thing is this button right here, because then that forces it to put every file that includes the components, the pages, and everything up to your server. And what's also important is that, especially if you've moved versions, if there's any kind of recompiling of content before it goes up on the server, you know that it's done that recompile. So it just, maybe one of your UXs needed to have a different little piece of JavaScript that the system does for you automatically. So those are the kind of steps I take to try and make sure that my app is running really, really cleanly, and then I can move from one version of the app server to another one.
Excellent. Here is a question, and that is if a report is HTML, is it possible to export the definition to be used in the UX template system?
That's a great question. The answer is I don't know, but that's interesting. What the individual is saying is that basically you use this to lay out your report. So it's a nice editor, kind of scenario. And the reality is this all gets rendered as CSS, and these are called templated. But he was wondering if there was a way, save as, no, report. I don't know if you can. That's an interesting question. I don't think you can. That's a great idea, because once you've used this to make it lay out, you could then save it as a text file and use what's called templating. And what templating is that Alpha has built in a whole bunch of functions that will take JSON, like a JSON object which has data in it, and then you give it an HTML template, and basically it goes through and it takes the field information out of the JSON data and represents that template. And it's extremely fast, it doesn't require any server, and it really allows you to make your life really, really easy. So what he was saying is maybe you could use the form device to create these JSON templates. So Dave, I'm going to forward that to Selwyn and take credit for that idea. So just to let everybody know here up front that brilliant idea. No, I would never do that. So I think that's a cool idea, because we need to just say, because what we're doing here is, the only tricky part is that when you build this report, and let me show you how that works, is that when I create a new report here, I can select either a SQL data source or a custom data source. Well, you kind of want to say, here's some JSON, and give us some sample JSON that would be what would be used for the templating. So there's kind of an issue of, well, this is all built around reporting from a database or reporting from a custom data source. What you'd really want to have is like JSON, that you could do that. But I think custom data report source is kind of cool, because you can have a function here. Let me see if this And then, let's see. Yeah, see, you'll notice the data that I'm creating in here is kind of a columnar data structure. To explain what I was doing there is that when you create a report, you can create a report from a SQL data source where you just select a table, and that works great. That's traditionally how it goes. You also have the ability to build a report from what's called a custom data source, and that's where it calls an XBasic function, and in that function you can generate the information. So you could call a web service, you could do a whole bunch of calculations, and then pass that data, and then the report goes, oh great, I've got this data, and then you can lay it out accordingly. But I was looking at that. Right now it takes it as a like piped limited data, but what would be neat is, yeah, if you could say, okay, select some JSON data, build a report off it, and then save that as a template, then that would be really, really powerful. So we'll go ahead and forward that over to the dev team as kind of a concept. But I don't think there's a way to do that now, but that would be really cool. Really allow you to do some really cool editing of the form and allow you to really make it sharp.
Excellent. Let me see what else I've got here. Oh, here's another one. I thought we ran out of questions. I thought we were going to go home early, but apparently not. Here's a question that we get a bunch of times, and I really think we should do our own webinar on this. I know we've talked about it, so let me just read you the question. What's the best way to kick off an XBasic routine at some time overnight? Let's, for example, at 2 a.m. each night, I want you to run this script. How would you go?
Good point. The best way, and I mean the most straightforward, easy way to stay within the environment is to use the Alpha runtime engine, which is really just the same thing as the Alpha, engine, but it's meant to run as sort of a runtime. And you can find information about the runtime on there. But the beauty of the runtime system is that A, it runs as a native app on your server. So therefore it has an enormous amount of speed. It uses all the capacity. 2, it just uses XBasic, so you can write little XBasic scripts that you want to run. It has all the functionality, so you can call reports and you can email those reports. All the things you would normally do on a web app, you can do with the runtime there. And third, which is really, really powerful, is that it can be scheduled like a regular any application on a Windows server. So you can set up and have it launch every night or do whatever it happens to be. But what I find that's really cool about that is that there have been some techniques that will actually on a nightly basis make a call to the app server and then run a script on the app server and then it does stuff. But the downside of that is that you're consuming resources for the app server that could be best served, say, for people who are connecting to it with mobile interfaces or desktop web. Plus, you're kind of going through the whole layer of the app server and all those pieces, whereas if you're just running a script that maybe does a bunch of database updates or wants to run a report, you can get a higher level of efficiency by using what's called the runtime engine. And in fact, you've heard before we have what's called the report server. Our Alpha's report server is really a runtime engine that's basically doing reports for you. So it offloads the app server when you're doing reports, it hands it off to a runtime engine that then runs those reports and does all the work, has higher performance, higher capacity, higher throughput, and therefore your app server can be sitting there happily answering requests from people out in the field. So I would suggest looking into the Alpha runtime capability, and it really, it's pretty straightforward, and there's some sample scripts out there on the message boards about setting up and having it run kind of on an automated fashion. But I've found after a bunch of experimentation that is the most efficient way, because you can re-leverage the code that's in your web application, so you don't have to recreate code in another language, and you can and it's Alpha, so you kind of stay within the environment. You don't have to learn a whole new set of skill sets and do a whole bunch of weird things to make it all work.
Great. So someone just wrote in and said, the runtime, is that the thing for the desktop? Can you?
Aha! And the answer is great observation. Brownie points. Yes, basically the history of it is this, is that, Alpha started out, and if we go to the control panel, you would create DBF tables and you could create a whole application on here. So the question was, great, I've got this development system that cost me a certain amount of money. I now want to put this on the desktop of a manager or a administrator or someone like that. Well, I don't necessarily want to give them the whole application environment. I mean, the development environment. They're not developing. All they're doing is running an existing database. So Alpha created what's called a runtime engine, which is basically a stripped down version of the full development system. And therefore, you could install this on their system and at a lower price than buying a development system, and then give them a Alpha database that has been created using the development system, and then they can run everything. And then there's a bunch of features on it in terms of being able to link to data sources and other things like that. So yeah, great observation. It really is from the desktop. What we're doing is we're taking that desktop runtime, sort of a module, and running it on the server as another process on the server. And again, since it's a desktop application, you have full access to the processor. So you're not limited to, say, one core on the processor. Since it's a desktop application, the system's going to give it as many resources as makes sense and can do it. The other is you get access to all the hard drives, the systems, whatever you need to do to be able. And so the performance is really, really fast. In fact, I was talking to one of the developers about this, and they have a company that every night they have this massive data warehouse with millions of records, and part of their requirements is every night they have to create a documented record of everything in their warehouse. Crazy, but they have to create PDFs from all their data in their databases. Well, that's a lot of crunching. So what they did is they created a Alpha runtime that every night it kicked off, or every evening it kicked off. It didn't affect their existing running system, so it was on a separate application, and literally all it did was make queries, run reports, save those reports as PDFs, and did that. And it took them 8 hours every night because of the sheer size and everything that needed to be done. So they did an enormous amount of jobs on it with really high performance without impacting their other people who were just running the web server and doing the other pieces there. So very reliable. I mean, once you have it up and running, it's like clockwork because it's off very, very mature. And you get all the benefits of having a local desktop and all the benefits of using either always up. That's that's cool thing is you can run it as a service. So therefore, if the machine reboots, it's going to restart that runtime, and so the next time it needs to run, it runs. So a lot of really cool advantages, and definitely worth looking into for that kind of nightly, I call them cron jobs or whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm. And yes, speaking of looking into it, we have another vote for someone who says that they would really like to see a demo on this. So it seems interest is actually quite high.
You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle it.
The runtime truth.
We'll show you the runtime truth. Yeah.
Yes, we will.
Let's make a point to do that. I'm going to note that down right now.
Yeah, that's been kind of a persistent question. I use the term persistent because every couple months I hear people talking, because there are things that you want to be able to do, and it's just on these enterprise systems, there's a lot of regular jobs that you want to be doing.
Sure. Yep. Just a quick question about tomorrow's webinar. For those of you who don't know, Selwyn Rabens will be giving a presentation on version 4 Alpha Anywhere v4.2 features, which include audio recordings and the new reporting capabilities. That is at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so it's Boston, New York time, 1 p.m. The link to it is in the chat window. If you don't have a chat window on your GoToWebinar control panel, go ahead and send an email over to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. So let me see what else we got here for questions. It looks like we are running out, which is good because we're just about out of time. But if you do have any questions,
thank you, everybody.
Yeah, excellent questions. Yeah, if you do have any further questions during the week or something that you would like to cover in a demo, please send your questions to guides, G-U-I-D-E-S, at alphasoftware.com. Today's session has been recorded. You will find a copy of the recording at videos.alphasoftware.com. So, Dion, I'd like to thank you for presenting. I would like to thank all of you for asking your excellent questions and for showing up today to our webinar. We hope to see you tomorrow at Selwyn's webinar and next week at our next weekly Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A webcast. Thanks again. Have a great day and goodbye.